Hello, hello everybody and everybody's Otterbots.
Buena.
Hi JP, hi Francisco.
Sorry.
No problem. Hi Victor, hi Ankit, Alia, hey Adam, Dave, Kaisa, hello, Nick. Oh wow, so happy Nick's here. Nick from Hats Protocol Kia, huge fan of your work. We were talking about inventories and identities last week in Denver. Um, if I'm not careful, I might sit here and listen to this whole thing. I'm really grateful to everybody for being here. We're at the last fireside for Kernel Block 8. It always feels like a very special moment in time for me, the last Kernel Block week. It's week 7 and feels like it just like it flew by and it always does. But the nice thing about Kernel is definitely the ongoingness. We really don't stop on this first slide often, but what we've described Kernel in the past is as an underground stream weaving the principles, people, and projects of our web, a place of honesty, trust, excellence, clarity, and awareness. And the idea for the stream is definitely as that it can be tapped back into. And we've said that throughout, and we hope that you felt that option. So even though block 8 ends this week and we will the final module, we will have an underground stream that hopefully lasts for a long time. For Kia's benefit, our guest, Kia's been in Kernel in the past. She's led a guild, the Dows and Dragons Guild, for a few blocks. So she kind of knows what Kernel's all about, but here's a slide that gives you a sense of the people of Kernel. You'll get to know them in a different context through their questions and through their voices soon, which might be even better than what you see on the screen. Um, and then for Kernel KB8, just the last event of the block. We have the block party tomorrow. We're really excited. Mari from Bonfire from KB8 is hosting the open mic portion. If you have anything you want to share, and the whole thing is really going to be just about stories and the different stories that you have from the block, things that you want a reason to remember or want to say to anyone as the block ends. Of course, the block party is one part of that. Our other encouragement is, send anyone a DM, send a message in gratitude if there's anyone who's really made an impact on your 8 weeks. And how that stream continues is definitely through another block and through other things that happen between the blocks. We do know that KB9 is going to happen in July, so we're really looking forward to that. It's only 4 months away. It'll be here before we know it. So if you have anyone in your mind who you think might enjoy being with us for KB9, please do send them our way. The apply button is open, and each of you have 3 tokens to move people directly to the group conversation stage. And we're looking forward to meeting anyone who you send our way. There's been so much this block in terms of artifacts, and I really like this quote at the top to describe an artifact. It says, an item of cultural or historical interest is the textbook definition, but then the quote underneath says objects in their tangibility provide an opportunity to debate meaning and control our memories. Um, Thinking about the use of the word control there a bit, but there are so many artifacts from the block. Of course, some online in the Slack, and then many in person. The I see Esther here. She went to the Amazon during this block. She was like in the Amazon. So cool. Avdesh made a entire YouTube playlist of all of the songs that he saw on the Jam Music channel that he plans to continue helping curate. It's such a beautiful set of songs, better than any uh, algorithmically recommended playlist I've had, um, literally ever. And there's people who came for Expo. There's people who posted messages in the intros channel. There was the offer that Christo made for identity mapping, one-on-one sessions that again was inspired in part by Kia's work on inventories, not identities. And I think 20 people at least have signed up with Christo so far to do these one-on-ones and perhaps to get to know themselves better while also contributing to the map. There have been all these meetings in person in different cities and countries around the world. I don't know how many. Alia may be able to put it in the chat, but it's at least 10 dinners have happened in different cities. I see New York here, I see London here, um, I see Barcelona and others. Um, and what I want to offer is that, we've gone through this pretty much this entire syllabus now, with each week being one Web3 principle and one personal principle. And what I want to offer is that for me, the way that the syllabus was fashioned, it was written with the idea of a memory palace in mind. And I think I ought to leave it to Kia, who can kind of tell you about the history of something like a memory palace better than I can. But the idea is that it's a place that you can return to. It's a place where you can place your ideas and update and change them. And that's definitely been the way that the syllabus has operated for me in my life now for 4 years. There's a module on trust, there's a module on value, there's a module on freedom. And at the beginning, it was, the first time somebody had asked me in quite some time, like, well, what do you think the word trust means? What does it mean to you? What does freedom mean to you? And we've now had the chance to talk about a lot of these words that everyone's heard in specific contexts. But the opportunities will come up again. You'll have to ask yourself what the word trust means to you in a lot of different contexts over life. And hopefully, the syllabus at least offers a chance um, to continue that conversation. That's at least how it's served for me, is that, as new information comes along about what freedom is based on what's going on in the world, what's going on practically on projects that we're working on, what does censorship resistance mean, given the context of specific projects. the Memory Palace offers kind of a chance to update. And so I think that this week the idea of the Memory Palace will be weaved in with the topic of the week, which is the gift. And the the two principles that we're exploring our inquiries are on scaling ability. So we talk a lot about scalability as one word. This is looking at it as two separate words. What does it look like for us to approach scaling ability? And then uh, giving as a sacred act. And the two modules are on giving and scalability. And I wanted to start just with giving for a second. There's in this module the references to, let's see, I'll just even go into it so we can kind of click around. There's a reference to Eric Raymond, who is one of the kind of like early hacker open source people in our kind of lineage now that Ethereum and a lot of the crypto protocols stand upon. He worked in the 90s and um, and had a post here that was about the hacker milieu as gift culture. And in this, he talks about the differences between the market and gift culture, which is what open source culture is kind of built upon. And um, can get into it further, um, but there's this quote at the bottom that I thought uh, was interesting. It says, um, let's see. What this shows in the case it wasn't obvious is that there's more than one way to run a gift culture. History and values matter. I've summarized the history of the hacker culture in a brief history of hackerdom, the ways in which it shaped uh, present behavior are not mysterious. Hackers have defined their culture by a set of choices about the form that their competition will take. It is that form that we will continue to examine. So uh, Raymond talks about the ways that gift culture ultimately have to do with the choices on culture and cultural practice. So that's one part of the module. The other part that gets discussed a bit further in the portion called the gift is from a lecture and a conversation between a man named Lewis Hyde and a woman named Robin McKenna. And the key point that I want to draw up, at least for now, is that the main point is to really explore deeply the nature of gift economies. How do they function? What are they based upon? And um, and how do they flow? And so the big section here is right here on connection, circulation, and spirit, where there's a lot of old stories about gift exchange and how they work. Um, and the main difference is described here. It says, gift giving creates a connection between giver and receiver. Gifts induce gratitude and a consequent sense of obligation towards relationship. The cardinal difference between gift and market exchange is that the great virtue of the marketplace is that there is no enduring connection, which is an important thing when you think about modern society. If we had to create a connection with every single person who's a part of our life, well, I guess there's kind of a question, an open question there, like how would that change how we operate, and still knowing that in some cases it is an important thing to be able to rely on somebody without necessarily requiring connection to continue. Um, Gifts uh, in their spirit require uh, ongoing circulation in order to increase in value. So the sense of property in gift exchanges necessarily is quite different because for the property of a gift to continue flowing, it has to continue to move. So that makes it a very different type of property than what we traditionally, or I would say in modern culture, think of as property. Because in gift cultures, there's this idea that um, let's see, there's some sense of increase or something gaining in life as it circulates. But then the opposite side of that is that um, if something stagnates, it's kind of the opposite of that. It feels like it almost calcifies. So for property to continue to move is an interesting requirement of the gift economy. So I think I've spoken quite a bit. We can get into some of the deeper links, but I think another important part when we think of scaling ability is just this simple notion that um, scaling ability from Illich, he says, we must insist that no model can or should be scaled universally. Scaling ability is an adventure of imagining and constructing new frameworks in which individuals and communities can develop. Um, and so there's a connection between these two things because if uh, gift economies require a sense of ongoingness and obligation, then it encourages a locality of scaling ability, a locality-based scaling ability. And I think a lot of this will come up with Kia's work. But before we get there, I wanted to pass the mic to Aya from KB8, who's been such an important part of KB8. Joined so many conversations. We talked about improv, we talked about games, we've talked about design. She's been a listening ear to so many in this block. And given we have Kia here, who is deeply inspired by astrology and the stories that come from it, wanted to welcome her well alongside Aya, and maybe say a bit more about um, how astrology ties in to some of the things that we might talk about today.
Hi all. Really, really glad to be here. Yeah, so I was having a conversation with Vivek about the story behind astrology, and I think we both mutually realized about how all that relates to what we're talking about here for the gift. And yeah, so I think that when we think about astrology, with it being thousands of years old, we have a lot of different connections and personal feelings about it. But what I find really compelling about astrology is that it essentially tells a story about life cycles and energies. So, w back in the pagan times, Aries was the start of the first sign in astrology, and and what Aries represents is the first fire that kind of sparks life into being. And as you progress down the astrology, I guess, cycle, you kind of go through different phases of life. So by the time you get to Virgo, which is in the sixth house, with Aries being the first, so it's directly at the bottom of the chart. Virgo is kind of about young adulthood and service, and particularly service to people around you and the community. And so you keep progressing and go through the different stages of life. And when you get to Aquarius, the second last sign in astrology, you're kind of like at the end of your natural life at that point. And Aquarius is very much about service to humanity at large. So you go from the sort of, self-directed energy of wanting to make a difference in the world of Aries to Aquarius, which zooms way out, way past the self and is about contribution to humanity at large. And with the very last sign in Pisces, Pisces is very special because it's all about the 12th house is all about the unconscious. It's about dreams. It's Pisces. The twin fish are like it's like it's in water, the waters of amniotic fluid essentially. So you kind of go back into the birth cycle, and then you incubate something new again. So then you circle back into the first house of Aries, where that first spark, that first fire is born again. So what I find really fascinating about astrology is that these myths and these symbols are so potent, and there's so many different lenses from which to interpret them. And the whole theory is that for signs that are direct opposites on the chart, they have opposing energies as well. And often these signs, if we talk about compatibility, sometimes there's a tension, but also you also stand to learn the most from the sign that is directly opposing you, because each sign is really about how you channel energy into the world, and the house they're in is like the sort of the stage of or the scenery of your life, the situation, the environment of your life in which those energies will come out. So when we talk about gift giving, so much of gift giving really is about the flow that is out there, that we put out there in the world, and so much of that is about generosity, about putting energy out, putting things out in the world without necessarily expecting a return, or not knowing what shape in which it'll return to you. And so yeah, with Virgo, for example, Virgo channels energy in a very, very fastidious way. It's very perfectionist. It's about realizing things in um, in a very concrete way, whereas Pisces is the sign of dreams. So Pisces might give that energy back in a way that's much less tangible. That so so Another thing that really appeals to me is that when you look at the words friendship and freedom, um, essentially they actually share the same root word in pre, which means love. And when we think about giving away, there is a sort of surrender to that, because you have to give something up in order to give something to someone else. And so there is a sense of surrendering and of liberation at the same time. You liberate yourself from having to carry this thing when you gift it to someone else. So the root of all love really is this sort of exchange between all of us. And I think there's just so many beautiful lenses from which to think about giving and energy flow. And I'm really happy to be sharing this all with you today, and really looking forward to Kia's conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Aya. Thank you. The friendship and freedom and the requirements there, it is another example of the word freedom um, kind of molding in my head, changing in living time. So thank you for everything there. Um, and yeah, I really want to get into it with Kia. We've been very light on her bio, and we've written writer and tinkerer, partially because if you've been paying any attention at all, we've probably referenced Kia like 100 times already this block, and she's done so many things in the context of crypto. She worked at Gnosis for a long time in strategy, and has done incredible work there. She worked on Gnosis Guild. She's done many more things than I can name, but I remember explicitly with Adam Miller in the first conversation we had this book, referencing a prehistory of DAOs, inventories, not identities, coming up with Christo as he then worked on these identity maps. And so many more references. So Kia, I would love if we just got into it, given we've kind of spoken quite a bit. I wonder if anything from the above or the things we've spoken about so far uh, feels like a good place for you to start, or if there's anything that you'd like to begin with.
Sure. So thank you for the kind introduction. And thank you for the lovely conversation to start this off. I guess I'll just dive in associationally about how I see a lot of these themes connecting. So I think like a lot of kind of Web3 work has to do with how we think about memory in certain ways. So in the sense that everything is stored on chain, well, can it really be everything? But certain transactions and actions are stored on chain, they're publicly accessible, they can be kind of woven into very beautiful tapestries and data gardens, etc. But I think something we often forget is also that one of the historically most well-known ways we have of remembering things actually has like a deeply spatial orientation. So that's what I was struck by in the kind of conversation of talking about complementary energies and talking about the different zodiac signs of just them like spatially being across from each other. So there's something like very visual in how we remember kind of contrasting opposites or how we navigate, how we store data that is like an arrangement in some way. And the way that we think about kind of like on-chain memory is often like a kind of linear progression in time where it's one transaction follows the next in discrete block time. But I think it's lovely how you approach the kernel syllabus as a kind of memory palace because, and also seeing the kind of different modules laid out next to each other in a table, there is this kind of spatial memory that can be retraced. So both through like going through the sessions from one to another on this kind of static page, but also of these experiences and kind of linkages of everyone who participated in this block kind of speaking with each other. I think it's really important to remember that like as you're building Web3 products or other things that like the data is not the memory. Often it's how it's like spatially arranged in relationship to other things. So there's a lot you can do with it, but it's like those connections, arrangements, complementing energies, etc., that really like drove a chord for me in this opening discussion.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I want to like nudge on it further. There are two big concepts from your recent work that I considered like really important ways. Number one was uh, living and latent memory. And then the second part was associative and tech, taxonomic arrangements of memory. And I think we've already started to nudge into this idea of associative arrangements here. Taxonomic, please correct me if I'm wrong, being kind of like, okay, like dictionary definitions of what specific words mean, but then the associative arrangements being like the ways that things tie together. And maybe if I could illustrate by example, and you could tell me if I'm right. Like one of the other fun little tidbits that I don't know if anyone's seen really in the syllabus, but we have the 8 modules. But the way that Andy did it is like, okay, you have these modules, there's one personal inquiry and one Web3 inquiry per block. Inquiry internal here and then inquiry external here. Kind of a fun little play on word. But if you look at module 6, over here, they're entitled Learn How to Learn and then Censorship Resistance. That's like one way that the titles work. But then the nav bar here typically reads out into like some type of sentence. In module 6, it says uncensored learning, which finally this block for me, block 8, it was the first time I actually made that association. And I was like, wait, yeah, uncensored learning. That's quite an interesting idea. And for so long, I had read it, in the way that it's normally put in front of me, learn how to learn censorship resistance. But but yeah, there's some type of association that that you can make and that the mind wants to make, but it's really like a time-based thing, and there's a bit of a chaos to it. I would love, Kia, if you could expand on any of that, um and specifically, like, this is the hard mode version of it, is like if you see any relation to that chaotic associative nature and gifts, gift giving, some of those types of ideas.
Sure. So I'll give a little context on the work that I've been doing the last year and explain how this relates to. It was mentioned I worked at Gnosis. I built a lot of DAO tooling. So I've been in this space for quite some time. And last year I took a little bit of time out to focus on research, and I joined the Summer Protocols program, which I think the applications are about to open for year 2. So as you kind of leave this block and considering what to do next. But it was a research program sponsored by the Ethereum Foundation, led by Venkatesh Rao, looking at the idea of protocols and if protocols warrant their own kind of field of study. And within that topic, I researched memory, which is a topic I became interested in through working in software more generally, but also particularly related to like how kind of Web3 blockchain data produces a particular type of what we call data or memory. And so in my research, I started looking at like, well, what actually do we mean by this term memory? Because we can use the word memory to speak about a public memorial holiday. We can use the word memory to speak of the loss of a loved one. We can also use the word memory to speak about computer data. And like all of these things feel like very different qualitative things. And more and more research I did, I was actually kind of blown away by how much we equate like memory that we store in our minds or in relationships with computer memory. And basically all the ways that we have to speak of our own memory are through computing metaphors now. So diving into this research, I thought, oh, well, maybe through my research project, I can start, although many scholars, philosophers, and builders have done a lot of work around this area already. I was like, well, maybe I can weave together these things to start like having more clear qualitative difference and more descriptive terms for how we relate to memory in these different venues. So some of the terms I started working with through this research project that will tie back into our whole session are the ideas of like taxonomic memory and associative memory, as well as living memory and latent memory. I'll give hopefully clear, simple explanations, at least of the first two. So in this kind of idea of living memory, I think it's a very colloquial phrase where you say, oh, something's in living memory, like in the sense that like kind of people alive now have a sense of that thing having happened. So in living memory, I mean a kind of memory that is actively being transmitted. And by latent memory, I came to refer to something that has the possibility of being, great, thank you, the possibility of being like transmitted, but is not actively being transmitted. So in the same way that you'll have, like kind of data on a hard drive, that would be latent memory, but when you access it, that's living memory. Or it could be that you might remember someone's birthday, but when you kind of come and give them a gift for their birthday, it becomes living through that act. And so these kind of two modes of thinking about like what is memory that is being transmitted versus memory that can be transmitted, and somehow kind of making a differentiation between. Because often when we think of, for instance, the catalogs of natural history museums and kind of pinned butterflies, it's a form of memory that like we won't remember all the species names necessarily, and we won't necessarily know where they came from unless this process is kind of actively recalled and transmitted over time. And then also, I came up with this kind of idea of taxonomic and associative arrangement. I don't want to go too deeply into it because it's a lot, or I don't think it's too complex, but it's just a bunch of words for a quick Zoom call. But basically this idea of taxonomic arrangement, which is what we might be used to when we learn about kind of different plant species. We learn that Many species belong to a similar genus, and then those species are related to each other on an evolutionary tree. So there's a kind of taxonomy of relation between specific plants. And these are all items that have very clearly defined, often hierarchical relationships with each other that are kind of revealed through classification. But then there's another form of memory, associative arrangement that I call, that actually kind of produces relationships simply through putting things near each other. So it's a kind of way of sorting that emphasizes an affective quality and kind of creates the category of relationship through these things just being next to each other. So an example would be looking at kind of how Andy arranged the tabs, as mentioned. So basically like having uncensored learning kind of subtly next to each other on the tab of like, oh, suddenly you see there's a kind of different type of relationship and different idea of education produced through these words simply being associated with each other in a kind of non-taxonomic way on the sidebar. So it's not necessarily the associative, which creates its own relationships, and taxonomic, which tries to reveal given relationships. It's not that these things are necessarily opposites, even though they're spatially on the other side, but just that there's kind of like two lenses for how we arrange things in this mode. So in thinking about kind of memory, on-chain data, gifts, etc., I would say this is improvisation in terms of relating it to our discussion, but I would say that there is a kind of, there's this kind of old text. I don't know if it's worth going into. It's actually a Derrida text. I think it's called The Gift. It's called Given Time. I won't go into it in depth, but basically it talks about how for something to be a true gift, it has to be something that's somewhat independent of time itself. So it actually has to kind of like produce a relationship that has no expectation of return at some point in time. And like the whole text is like, is this possible, etc. And there's something in kind of associative arrangement that like a gift creates a bond with like an uncertain amount of kind of time for that relationship potentially. So, different cultures around different types of giving might have an expectation that, if you attend a dinner, it's your turn to host one within a couple of months, or you're kind of out of the dinner crew, let's say. But there's something about the idea of like a pure gift that kind of like has no term at which the gift kind of ends, right? It's not an investment contract, it's not an option contract that could be called, and it's not a kind of taxonomic relationship that like you can clearly identify the relationship of these two things in time. So I think there's something like in kind of all of you coming together for this course and for also how we think about kind of like giving gifts on chain, that there's something that they like don't need to follow a strict logic or a strict relationship between the things. It can kind of just happen. Okay.
Love it. I love
that we together a lot of things, but
yeah, that's incredible. And I think we'll get to now pretty soon that portion of the call where if anyone has questions, please feel to raise their hand and we'll get into the kind of the magic of the associative nature of even just one specific fireside. And I have never heard that specific definition of a gift from Derrida, but it's a fantastic one. And it's one that like, when I think about it for me, it's like I never, studied Derrida. I only know his name because Andy has mentioned him in the signature economies, where his reference to Derrida is about actually the nature of a signature, and the fact that it is individual and unique, but also meant to be repeated. So everyone has their own unique signature or sign, but the purpose of it is to use it again and again and again in a way that can be provably you. But why do I bring that up? The only reason I remember that is because, I heard it in conversation. I heard it in relation with somebody who I'm keen to continue conversation with. And then now I've been thinking about the gift for 3 or 4 years because this module has been in front of me for 3 or 4 years. And now Derrida comes up again in this surprising context for the first time since signature economies, and adds a new thought into the gift, which is something that like I have placed somewhere in my mind now. And it's been such a unique experience to me. That's why I think I'm like harping on it. It's like I used to think I had a bad memory. Like I remember thinking that, and I was like, oh man, those college years, they did me wrong. There's no way out of this problem anymore. I just am gonna have a bad memory now. And the experience over the last 4 years is that, like, well, no, not really. Um if anything, like it's been kernel slack, and like the way that the culture around it is like you send links to each other, and then I remember links a bit better because I've sent them to specific people, or like the kernel syllabus where it's like, okay, well, now freedom lives somewhere in my ongoing kind of like internet habits. And so so does the word gift. And so when somebody else says anything else, it gets added to somewhere where it already exists. Um, uh, to further like move the convo forward, I do want to touch on this part of the module that Kia referenced with Derrida. It's um, in the module it says, uh, let's see, it was right there. You saw it. It says, the act of giving does not create gifts. It is only when it is received in good faith that a gift truly exists. So it's not the giving of a gift that can make it uh, that completes the cycle. It's the receiving that does it, because to Kia's point, you know, if you give something and then there's this kind of expectation of return, or this feeling that it's been given to kind of hold one over me, then a lot of people don't like entering into gift economies because of these things. And there's that whole angle to it. But um, given this is the personal inquiry of the week, the one nudge that's really stood out for me with this module is that um, like this section is entitled "Receiving Gracefully." So if it's true that uh, receiving is the means by which a gift actually a gift exchange can be, let's say, I guess, instantiated, then something that we all ought to consider how we might improve ourselves in is in receiving gracefully, is in having a better sense of our own needs and becoming more comfortable with our needs. Um, there's a really beautiful little comic here where it says, "What's the bravest thing you ever said?" Asked the boy to the horse, and the response is "help." From the horse. And yeah, I really love these notions, like not that that taxonomic or latent memory are kind of like um the bad things, and that associative and living are the good things, but that like very often we think of uh memory as this latent thing, this thing that we can draw upon, and in terms of the taxonomic arrangement, that like there's information out there, and the information is static, and that we're going to go to a dictionary to get the answer, or even go to GPT and get the answer, but that like the way that it also could function is in this associative or living sense, in the same nature that the gift flows, or to Ayo's point, indeed, just like how energy flows, because those are those are functionally different ways to think about memory. Um, I'm curious what you think about that, Kia, and then we can kind of meander into conversation with everybody.
Sure. I guess one thing that came to mind on like a very, at least it was fitting to me and kind of practical note of having this conversation in the context of Web3 is the by virtue of the kind of ability of of addresses and inventories to be able to receive without refusal. So the sense that you can kind of send anyone a gift, you can send them an NFT, you can send them a token, and there isn't really a possibility. So I think there's something in kind of receiving gracefully that can be taken into account when you're kind of operating and rethinking through kind of market and gift economies of like, is this person choosing to receive this thing, or can there be mechanisms designed by which actually gifts can be received in these contexts and they can be received gracefully? So like on a very kind of like practical builder lens, like you can really put that one-to-one with like, how do you create the opportunity for someone to receive a gift in an environment where there's not always chance of refusal?
It's true. It's true. It's true. Yeah. I've seen some work being done on the UX front there too, I think by I think it was Zora, where they give you the ability to like hide all unwanted gifts, let's say, of which we know there have been many.
Yeah.
It's like references something called Trash DAO, which also seems like it's really well, Kia, thank you. I think there's ample ground to explore gifts and memories and the ways that they interact. Open to any questions or comments or thoughts from anyone. Please feel free to unmute.
Hey Kia, Dave here. I'm gonna put my question now, unless my memory fail me later. And just put out to you. Yeah, that was a really interesting and fascinating tech sort of, yeah, the latent and the associative memory. I guess where was sort of thinking a little bit about memory is this idea of like permanence and impermanence. And the more we're sort of living on chain, the more we're living with computers, we're seeing sort of memory stay and remain and every detail remembered. And thinking about like how sometimes we as people, like we have so many memories that we don't remember. Like, are they memories anymore? But like, Vivek was talking about university, and I think generally all of us can relate to so much we've gone through in life that we've, in some ways, our bodies have chosen to forget it, or our minds have chosen as ways of coping mechanisms or like dealing with trauma. There's so many ways where like we don't even have control about like what we choose to remember and what we don't. And then also thinking about like who chooses to remember. Thinking of I know in China, I was going to this really fascinating museum called the Stele Museum in Xi'an, which is in sort of one of the early nodes of the Silk Road. And there they had these steles where they had these big stones where they would write the end of a war or the victor of a war, sort of which emperor or which detail needed to be remembered. And thinking about like memory as this thing about power and politics and how that will forever be remained. I'm thinking like how many of our tweets today will even be remembered in 10 years or even accessible. So yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts are on this, on the implications maybe of maybe like human civilization, but also any like particular areas. So as we have more on-chain memory or more computer memory, and how that changes dynamics of how humans have dealt with memories in the past.
Sure. Yeah, it's a super pertinent and interesting question. A few different thoughts. One is that like Hannah Arendt writes on this a lot in terms of like as societies become kind of producing more archival memory, it's actually like a political imperative that there's greater compassion and how kind of that memory is to be understood, and that it's actually the ability for someone's actions to be forgotten that allows compassion to be politically viable. And of course, this goes either way. It's not so strict as this, but I just feel that there is like deep tension between like what we call human memory and what exists as political memory and what exists as now kind of computer public memory. And I've started to feel that, well, potentially like human and political memory have like a very complex, different relationship. There is something about computer memory that the term itself like totally fails to grasp a sense of memory that we have for ourselves. So like I actually don't even think necessarily that archival data should be thought of as memory anymore. Like I think we should actually just use a different term. I don't have many suggestions for terms yet, at least, but just in the sense that like there is something about kind of being able to forgive that feels very important, that is not one-to-one with data. And there's also something that there is a tendency, we'll see what comes now with kind of computer memory, but there is a tendency of also great grievances and terrible acts to be forgotten at times. So in this kind of like play between memory and forgetting, it's like, you know, what is the kind of compassion that allows remembering to happen while being forgiven? And I think that we need like clear protocols around like forgetting of computer memory in order for kind of society to continue having that compassion towards individuals. And I think also like I think often of like this idea of kind of like memory letting, like the ability to actually also at times like let go of memories, like might be something that becomes more of a thing. You know, we have EU data protection laws that allow the right to be forgotten, but it also just ultimately comes down to as many things to kind of the power to be able to kind of place something as memory versus not in public imagination, and the ability to kind of push back against that power. So none of like computer memory or political memory are somehow transcending typical kind of power relations. They're enmeshed in part of it. So
Thank you, Kia. Protocol for forgetting. That sounds really fascinating. Thank you.
Sister, then Krista, please.
Greetings of love and light and peace and darkness. I wanted to talk a little bit about something called the wheel. It's called the Wheel of Consent, and it was regarding giving and receiving, if you want to say, because until I learned it, I never realized that being a nice person and not being honest about how you really feel about someone's gift, that actually shifts in the Wheel of Consent, because there's well, I have it written down here. So, but if you put yourself into a victim role by doing that, this is karmically now we're talking about, because by not speaking our truth, we kind of think that it's okay because it allows the other person to think that they've given us a great gift, even though yeah, we didn't quite like it. If we shift out of that willing giver receiver mode, you put that person, you become a victim, and you put that person into the abuser karmic mode without even knowing it. And so it's something where the next time someone gives you a gift you don't like, actually by being quiet, we shift the Wheel of Consent into reaping victim and karmic energy without even realizing it. Yeah.
right. Would you like me to respond to that, or did you want to share more?
I'd love to. I'd love to hear what you think about that one.
Yeah, so I guess one thing, what I'll offer is that I like to believe that we all have, in different ways, an ability to practice honesty in our lives. And that the more that we can practice honesty and speaking what we feel, that is like even maybe a register above like what we feel, that like in speaking that, we can also give the other person power just as much as like we give ourselves power from thinking that. And that it doesn't necessarily need to produce those relations, because I think that sometimes those relations are produced when not all the time, like I really can't generalize here, but sometimes there's a sense of like maybe wanting, maybe like being annoyed at that person because of that gift. And it's not that you don't have to be annoyed at them, but just there's like I would like to believe that there's a way of speaking that kind of just gives both people power and like acknowledging the truth.
That's true.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you, sister. We'll go to Crystal. I want to shout out Nick too. If Nick, you have anything, glad that you joined us today. Crystal, please. And then David.
Thanks so much. Hey, Kia, this is Christo from Amsterdam. I'm a big fan of your work, as my adventure for KB8 was all about identity in the networked age. So I'd love to hear your perspective on the relationship between a few things. So looking at identity as an inventory rather than static. So that's one thing. And then also the connection to truly giving one's gift, right? And that is the capacity to receive and also then give. And so I'm curious about the dynamic between those three things, this evolving identity as an inventory in relationship to giving well, and what your take on that is.
Yeah. So I think this will also be improvisational, as I haven't thought about this explicitly before, but my first feeling is that essentially there is something in gifts that feel, well, it's a mix, right? Because I'm thinking that gifts are something that always evolve in time, because like the gift is can be utilitarian in some respects, but also carries a symbolic weight. It's hard to give a gift without also giving like a symbol of a gift if it's received as such. So there's something in a gift that's evolving in the sense that your relationship to it changes because it's so symbolic, but also at the same time, there is something kind of like eternal in the symbolism of a gift, of like, once a gift is given, it is like given forward in time. And so there's something in the kind of dynamism of that I think is what I tried to kind of give through trying to think through online identities, not being as static as kind of like our everyday identities. So the idea that there is a kind of dynamism to what we collect, what we receive, what we pass on to others, and always preserving that there is a kind of dynamism of self as there is a gift, like almost the molten core of the earth is always kind of has an inherent dynamism to it, even if the surface remains kind of relatively still. So I think like, yeah, there's something in symbolism that has this kind of similar dynamic quality that I was trying to say with what online identities could be.
I love that. Thank you.
Nick, please.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here. Kia, it's great to see you. And I'll just start by saying that deeply, deeply inspired, constantly thinking about some of your writing. So it's great to receive that gift. The kind of three threads that I'm mulling on, I'm not sure exactly how to ask about, is gifts as this kind of primordial, giving and receiving as a primordial interaction, and then reputation as a sort of like Web3 interpretation. And then the thing that I always am constantly thinking about is the dynamic hierarchies idea from the prehistory. So I guess to kind of loop those together, how do you, like, if we think about the gifting economy, or like the way that we give and receive, and then try to construct economy or organization on top of that, I'd love if you'd speak a little bit about like how you see those threads weaving together.
Sure. Yeah, and thanks so much, and good to see you. Yeah, I feel that the older I get, the less my answers to these kinds of questions are adequate, in the sense of like not necessarily knowing the structures in any given context that will be the right structures. Which I used to feel that saying that would be a cop-out, but the older I get, the more I feel this way. So that said, I think there is something in like a kind of potential pitfall of certain like inherent qualities of kind of Web3 itself, that the idea of immutability, right? The idea that data is incorruptible through time and stored distributively in like a form of kind of perfect memory. We have like a form of kind of computing, like as I said before, like computer memory is so different from personal memory or political memory that it could almost warrant a different term. And it's hard when we have that type of computer memory paired up with reputation, which is such a human memory form. And I think, once again, it's something that's like never like outside of power relationships. So there will never be a system that will fully eradicate potential like abuse of a reputation system. How I think to a kind of heuristic that can be kind of put in place there is, and something I've advocated for a bit in some of my writing, is essentially the idea of having kind of web of trust identity systems, where there's like your identity is mutually defined by the kind of context that you operate within, so that those who work with you can have a contextual relationship there, and it can remain kind of human memory level, but that kind of reputation could still be portable to a different context and a different web of trust if you did need to operate somewhere else as like a trusted individual. I see this as like potentially like one heuristic that could kind of abet some of the common challenges of the conflict between computer memory and immutability and personal memory. But I think there's no perfect system, and like as long as you kind of set boundaries for like what these like different protocols for identity are doing, like you can kind of experiment and see what works well in one context and see what doesn't. And like I think the main thing is to be able to iterate and feedback and make sure that everyone's learnings allows them to keep going. That's kind of the main goal. The more I get older, is like just don't break people too much and don't break things too much, and just make sure that you can keep trying.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, just keep going, just keep learning. Amazing. Okay, we got JP, David, Sean. I was gonna, if Kaisa or Marquito want to share, there's some really good stuff in the chat. Let's see, we got 10 minutes left, Kia, is that right? 10 minutes. So let's see how we can do here. JP, David too, please. You're welcome to. JP, go ahead.
Okay. How has your relationship with life changed since blockchain as part of your awareness, and how we can use that as a vehicle for understanding how to bring people into Web3 on a smooth way?
Yeah, so I've had a mixed relationship to blockchain and crypto. I think like every technology like has affordances, but it's like fate is not predetermined. So I still see crypto as like a very generative space, and has a lot of interesting affordances. At the same time, like I did struggle, like, you know, last year seeing the FTX crash, seeing sanctions, seeing other things happen, and kind of like the certain like or this was even almost like a year and a half ago now, seeing like certain possibilities be curtailed, and in the case of FTX, like real harm being done. So, but I think what it has changed in my life is like the understanding of technical affordances, and the understanding that technical affordances for the most part can't be uninvented. They have to be kind of like gardened and curated towards ways that might be more helpful. So I think just in terms of bringing more people in, I think a lot of it is just advocating for the tech in a way that doesn't necessarily like always use the same narratives. Like maybe just advocating, like in the way that you asked me about my personal narrative, like you sharing your personal narrative with it will always be kind of truer and better for the tech than like kind of trying to come up with the perfect, not saying that you were doing this, but like anyone coming up with the perfect narrative of like how to sell it or communicate it. It's just one of those things that will take time, and that like ultimately it won't be undone. It's kind of here to stay. And we have to kind of deal with that. So yeah, I'm not so worried so much of it getting more people involved, but just more of the trajectory that it ends up taking.
I want to hop back to David, and then from David, Marikita, and then John.
Hey, thanks everyone for that. I'm gonna kind of throw it in a little bit of a different direction. I was just because I was thinking about Io's opening about the zodiac or the constellation sign, and I want to know, given how much time you spend thinking about memory, have you like gone into the concept of dreams a bit when you think about this stuff? And I'll kind of leave it open on that, but where have you explored that as a notion?
Sure. So yeah, I think about dreams a lot. I mean, my background is also as an artist and a writer. So I think one thing that's been interesting is I've also done just a lot of reading of papers about contemporary neuroscience and kind of latest understanding of memories. And pretty much all kind of neuroscientific understandings that we have of memory now point to the fact that every time we recall a memory, we actually reconstruct our understanding of that memory. So there's no sense of like a kind of incorruptible data that we experience. And so I think when people talk a lot about authentic memory or kind of like, did you remember that, or as a form of proof, it's like there's a sense in which like, obviously it's important to differentiate often that like something actually happened and passed between people in real life. But there is a sense in which we experience dreams as much as in the way that we experience memory. And I think dreams are really important. Yeah, maybe that's for later essays, but I think very much like if we can understand memory as a form of kind of dream making and a kind of similar conscious experience, we might be able to like understand more about when and how it's useful.
Seems like a reason to come back. Yeah, we'll have to come back. Marikita, and then John, and then Nick.
Hey, yeah, I really love this discussion. It's given me so many sort of different areas I want to kind of dig back in and explore later on my own. But yeah, like we were just chatting in the conversation in the chat, and something you said earlier about these unwanted gifts made me think of this Japanese term. I just love how many terms, like how specific the Japanese language can be. Like I think there's a term for the feeling you have when you get your hair cut and you don't like the result. But I was thinking specifically of this word, and I may butcher the I likely will butcher the pronunciation, but it's like arigata meiwaku, and it's a favor that someone does for you that's unsolicited and will actually kind of end up making your life more complicated, but you feel obliged to thank them anyway. Like all of that all in one term. And obviously like a favor is different to a gift, right? Like a gift, when we think of a gift, we generally tend to think of a material object, and a favor maybe is more of like an act of service. And so maybe favors often come with greater consequences. I don't know, but anyway, it was just something that came to mind. And yeah, thank you for all of these associations that you're sparking with everything that you're sharing.
Yeah, well, to that end also, it's funny because in Given Time, Jared is actually writing about a story by Baudelaire called Counterfeit Money. And I mean, all of this I read like a decade ago, so it's a little fuzzy, but it's essentially the short story is two friends walking, and someone is on the street is asking for change, and one of the friends, not the narrator, but the other person, gives them counterfeit money. And the whole Derrida rumination and the short story actually questions the nature of that gift. Like if that person goes on to use that counterfeit money, what if they have legal problems? What if like they believe they received a gift that they did not receive? What if it actually creates a greater burden, but it's still in that moment, it was kind of experienced as a gift? So I think there is like a real moral nature of like what is a gift, and it's like far beyond that moment of giving. It's like a lot of gifts can actually be burdensome in many ways and inauthentic despite appearances. So yeah, it's a very complex topic. So I'm glad that you brought up that term, because that's actually what sparks the whole story.
Awesome. That's awesome. I think we'll have one more for Kia and then let her go. We have 15 minutes after. I wanted to go to John if he's still here. I think
I'm here. Hi, Kia. Great to see you. And apologies, I feel like you've already fielded like a bunch of personal questions and it's kind of already been answered. But yeah, I listened to your summer protocol talk as well, and I mean it was fantastic. But yeah, I feel like kind of the things that are or like affect is something that's really coming up and like connecting both like this idea of associative and also the gift economy. And it makes me think of Brian Masumi's work and like the idea that like memory is not he says semiotically ordered and he opposes it to affect, which is embodied. So I was just wondering like yeah, as a writer and an artist, like are there practices that you have or like protocols that you have to to be more embodied or to like use your body as a mechanism for when you're conducting research or like just doing your work more generally?
Yeah, so also, hi, lovely to see you, and thank you for the question. Yeah, so I could speak about this for a lot of length. It's funny, I don't normally mention in public. I have no problem about doing so, but yeah, I like, well, for me, like I grew up as a dancer, got very into different types of yoga, and for me, like now I have a running practice. And it's funny because like during my running practice, especially during the pandemic in this park that was near my house, I started reading these books about memory and often like spatially mapping memory into events. So in the way that people use song lines and kind of map them into mountains, but I started doing it with the park nearby and kind of different constellations in the night sky to remember different myths and stories about them. And it would be like I'd turn the corner to this like, you know, pine bush or kind of like, just various different flowers all in the park. And I would just remember kind of different facts about different constellations and other things, but it was always experienced while running. And I think there is something about kind of like the affect of having like physical exercise, like elevated heart rate, different sensory awareness, especially when you're outside, that those kind of sensations and memories will always carry that affect for me. So I think like a lot of it as well is like very much related, as much as we like spatially remember things, like it's shown to be basically through the hippocampus in the brain, which is also where we get our general kind of spatialized body like knowledge of how to operate in the environment. So these things like this is once again another reason why I kind of like I don't want to say like Masumi wouldn't say this either, like computer data and computer memory is not without affect, but just like understanding them both as the same affect is like deeply just kind of not helpful to us. So yeah, I think it's really important to have like physical practices and to combine them with like our intellectual traditions as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, we could hang out with you for probably like beyond time. I think that's kind of what this was, but we want to let you go. Thank you, as always, for being with us. Your sabbatical has been a gift to everybody, so I'm glad that you took it. And I'm sure we will invite you back soon for whenever you want to be with us. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thanks. It's nice to see you again. Glad to be back, and thanks everybody for coming.
Okay, bye. We let Kia go, but we have a few more minutes if we want. It seemed like there were a few people who still had kind of thoughts. Happy to keep hearing them. If Nick, you do have something, if anyone else has anything they'd like to reflect on for the module or for the block, really.
Yeah, I could jump in. I've been thinking a lot about power relationships, and Kia had mentioned that in one of her answers. Like everything is kind of fundamental to power relationships. So, kind of an open question for our group to think about here is like, what's the role of gifting, giving, and receiving, and how do those things change when we involve a power relationship? One in one direction or another, and how can we evolve the way that we do power relating developmentally and technologically in a way that supports more of a gifting economy would be pretty interesting to me too.
I'll jump in with a stab at that question, Nick. This is an interesting one, I think a really important one. But I guess like if gifts are supposed to be given in good faith and power is supposed to be distributed to people, maybe power should be distributed based on the good faith that people demonstrate with giving gifts. And then the question's like, is that just? And if power does accrue to the people that do give gifts in good faith, what sort of hierarchy does that create?
Interesting. I like that. Okay, so
I keep coming back to this. I reread it in the I want to say Declaration of Cyberspace, but I know it's not that one. It's something that someone put out maybe 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of people in the space signed, but I forget the exact name. And it says, just power is derived from the consent of the governed. And maybe we could look at that idea through a gifting frame to kind of answer your question.
could have been from the Versus folks for sure. It's a good one. Anyone else have anything? Appreciate all the comments in the chat, everyone, and making it meaningful for Kia. I think I saw Johnny with his hand raised for a second. No pressure. Same with David. Sister, please, yeah. I'm losing sister, yeah. Okay. Sister, we can't quite hear you. We'll come back to you, yeah? We can try it again, actually. Let's see. You wanna try one more time?
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh, no. Oh no, sorry, sister. It's not quite working. Perhaps you put it as you can in the chat. We can try in a second too. Sorry about that. Johnny, did you have something?
Yeah, I'll try to articulate something that I've been feeling for the whole kernel in general, which is I really liked what was said about memory and associations and relationships and things being about orientations to each other. And I guess that my question, anyone who saw my presentation yesterday, is about how much is it possible for us to create shared memories, given that so much of how we enter into memory has to do with our own personal associations and our own connections. For example, one person might create a memory palace with associations that make sense for themselves and that really anchor it for their own experience, like the kernel syllabus, but for somebody else, it's so different. And it seems like kind of a core question because a lot of the previous modules have been about how Ethereum allows us to codify meaning and remember it forever and create systems around it. But how much can we even come to a consensus about meaning? I think that looking at other parts of the web make me wonder about that when even facts are kind of are difficult to agree on. So I guess that's it. Is how do we deal with that incompatibility, or not incompatibility, but the friction between the individual and the plurality? And I think that people touched on it in different places here, but yeah.
I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really, really wonderful thing. We're going to end on module 7 because we only have 8 weeks. We are thinking about making kernel block 9 weeks, because there was a meta module added at a time in the future. And just to poke into it, it's at this point now literally the last link in the in the book, and it is a mix of two texts. One, Helgoland, The World of Quantum Theory by Carlo Rovelli, pretty famous physicist. And then I don't even know how to say this, but it's The Root Verses of the Middle Way by Nagarjuna. So two things. But in response to Johnny, I really love this one. This one for me has this sentence has struck me in quite some time. It says, "The best description of reality that we have found is in terms of events that weave a web of interactions. Everything is what it is only with respect to something else." And for me, at least, my experience of reading this at first was like, wait, that doesn't make sense to me, because like things can just be as they are. Like what do you mean? Everything is what it is with respect to something else. But I mean, you know, can kind of take this as you wish, but it does start to, there's a level at which it makes sense, that we are who we are through others is another part that comes up through kernel, that we make meaning through our relationships and through our associations with one another, and like literally with our associations with one another, and or with ourselves, tying together things. And I think there's a bit of it going around the chat right now, but it is kind of that, not that there is one overall meaning that Ethereum or the internet or anything should provide, but that our role or responsibility is to find meaning and give it back and give it forward. That is a worthwhile effort within the bounds of reality, so to say. I really like Sister's quote as well. It's really, really good. I don't know if that's what you're trying to say out loud.
Yeah, no, it was. Sorry, I was getting a phone call through on my phone at the same time. So I was trying to say, I'm in a meeting. Yeah, so Anthony de Mello, he has an amazing book written many, many years ago called Awareness. And when he says, like, even if you give such a gift as to like see a child that's about to be run over by a bus, and you go and push the child out the way and get killed by the bus, that is still selfishness, because we had to make a decision about whether we want to live with our guilt for the rest of our life, or so it really it goes really deeply into the acts that we don't even realize we're doing. Like we don't realize we're like making that decision to do a kind thing, give a gift, like pass it on, The ones we don't know, that are the ones that are totally devoid of that decision. Well, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? Those kind of, yeah.
It's fantastic.
Don't know where that leaves us. Well, it means selfishness is not a bad thing. That is the thing. It's just to be aware of why we make the decisions we make. And most of the time it's because we might feel like we couldn't live with ourselves if we didn't, or we want to, intention is the key.
Yeah. I mean, and perhaps moving beyond the titles of giver or receiver. Anyone else? Io, we haven't heard from you since the beginning. If you're up for it, curious how this all landed for you. Thank you for helping us get going today.
Oh gosh, so many thoughts. I love that, the gift as a concept served as a springboard for so much conversation. we're now just now in the chat we were talking about the narrative surrounding gift giving as something that bestows power, because so much of social power is about reputation and the good that you put out there. I would love to hear from, everyone who participated in conversation today, because I feel like there's so many different beautiful directions that this could branch into.
I think there's an interesting thing there, Io, with like, are we all presupposing that power itself is bad, right? Or, there's a lot of sort of movement around power itself also being necessary, good and necessary, right? So I think that's a problem that I've seen a lot of people kind of run into. But if we wrestle with that and agree that like maybe certain power should be allocated appropriately, then we stop seeing power as this vile thing. I was just watching the last Airbender, the live action on Netflix, and just watching Aang just profusely refuse to accept the power of being the Avatar again and again and again, until eventually he was like, "Look, you have to do it. You have to accept to save the world." So there is a question, and I think the left and the right often fight over this, right, between power and competency, right? Competency of who is the who are the appropriate stewards to navigate us out of this place that we're in.
Well said. Well said. I think for me, power is neutral, and it can be harnessed in any which way. It's the intent in which you harness and use that power that matters. And yeah, I think the left tends to be more collectivist and tends to want to diffuse power and kind of revise that narrative from like the singular icon, the singular person who the more individualist perspective of that someone who is able to bring all this impact to the collective and point out all the sort of like intricate parts and relationships between everyone who has participated into propagating a movement into reality. And I think it's about that continual like bringing of attention back to all of our contributions, and just really like understanding the nuances and the relationality between all the different parts.
Attention to our contributions. That's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. It brings me to the last thing that I would want to add from the syllabus. Module 7, and lots of them are exploring the work of Graeber, who in many ways made both the left and the right quite mad at different points in his life. And this is a quote that I might end it on. It says, "One obvious role for a radical intellectual is to do precisely that, to look at those who are creating viable alternatives, try to figure out what might be the larger implications of what they are already doing, and offer those ideas back, not as prescriptions, but as contributions." At this point, possibilities as gifts. Such a project would have two aspects: one ethnographic, one utopian, suspended in constant dialogue. Yeah. The contributions will be big. Good deal. We are at time. Really, really, really appreciate everyone's comments. I'll leave the meeting open for a bit, play a little music, and let the chat roll as it needs to. But take care, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Hopefully see you at Block Party. Thank you for being with us for another Fireside. See you soon. Take care.